Hello and welcome to the August 24th, 2021 meeting of the Finance Committee. Pursuant to the Governor's June 16th, 2021 Act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Laws, Chapter 38, Paragraph 20, the Finance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with keeping the public informed of actions during this meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting please state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. At this time, I will take a roll call attendance vote. Ms. Zemer.
Here.
Mr. Alfred.
Present.
Mr. Whitaker.
Here.
Mr. Murphy.
Here.
Mr. Robinson.
Here.
And I am, of course, here. So we can begin. I don't believe we have anything, let me see, do we have anything? I don't think we have anything of consequence in terms of minutes. I don't see anything, so we can move on from there. Okay, any other administrative things? So let's get right to the update from the town administrator. So go ahead, Travis.
Okay, so I think I'll leave capital to Vin Murphy, chair of the capital subcommittee. I would point out, as we were just speaking about, the select board did not meet on Monday night. They're meeting Thursday night this week. They will meet the 30th. Well, I won't be with them. And then they will not meet the first week in September, which goes from a holiday into a holiday. And then they'll be back on the 13th and the 20th before the warrant closes on the 20th.
So just to be clear, Travis, so they're meeting this Thursday.
They're meeting August 26th.
13th?
Yes, August 26th
Okay.
and August 30th. Then they will not meet until September 13th. Then September 20th is the date that the warrant is scheduled to close, which would leave the 20th and the 27th most likely as the two meetings after the warrant closes for the select board to really deliberate before we get into document production, most likely.
Okay, continue, sorry.
This Thursday's meeting, because we've been a little off cycle, is a relatively robust agenda. The ARPA steering group has met with, I'd say 6 of the 17 requests that we've received so far. They will meet again tomorrow to continue through the list. The latest recommendations are not sizable in terms of dollar value, but do have some ramifications beyond. So Youth and Family Services, the total request was about $6,000 over the life for the 2 small requests. Library has requested sort of the ability to kickstart some of or accelerate some of the transition they've been making from hardcover books into some of the electronic components. And ARPA steering supported that. They asked some questions on the COA request, so that we'll hear those. They'll also hear tomorrow. And this agenda is posted online, again, not for open meeting law purposes, just for transparency purposes. The rail trail has made 3 requests. They will be up tomorrow. And then additionally, the facilities manager and I, as we've got bids in on the septic, will ask for a little bit of coverage for that project. So ARPA steering continues, and Thursday night, the select board will continue its role in that process. Additionally, the CARES Act is coming to an end in terms of the guidance that we have, which is to close it out by October. A sizable request and approval from the select board, from the school committee, to close out FY21 was granted. It took out the essentially the largest portion of what was left in that, but there is a slight balance, so we'll continue to discuss with the select board how to close that out. Some small requests coming through that may be discussed tomorrow if Chief Cassidy feels those are ready for prime time. Another big agenda item, depending on your interest for Thursday, is the Cable Advisory Committee's recommendation on the Verizon license renewal. So anybody paying attention to these things, if you're an HCAT viewer, it will impact you. Sorry, I see a hand. Is that before I move on? Should I?
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Dan.
I can't hear you, Dan.
Yeah, neither can I.
I can do it at the end, but it was just about ARPA.
Okay. Yeah, we'll wait till the end. Go ahead.
Okay. So Verizon license renewal, previous town meeting vote paid for the legal fees for that. We did end up going over slightly, and the select board budget had to cover that at the end of FY21. Not substantially, but I think enough that as we move forward, the next license agreement. So this is a license agreement for 5 years for Verizon. The next one is going to be a 10-year agreement on Comcast that we're going to want to consider making sure that we have the legal fees, the legal costs covered in our next iteration, because we did go over on the town meeting's previous appropriation for that. So Barry Sims and the Cable Advisory Committee will be making a recommendation to the select board on Thursday night, and they'll be with us. Additionally, Matt Zedek will be proposing some small tweaks to our recycling center vendor contracts. As we discussed, we now have a revolving fund that takes any revenue from that to reinvest in the recycling center. This is in keeping with those discussions that we've had. And then I will have, for the first time in this cycle leading into October, a beginning discussion and outline of what the warrant seems to be looking like. We do have the citizen petition that we are aware is being circulated. For those signatures have not been returned to the clerk's office, but those types of things I'll be putting on the select board's radar for discussion. Lastly, two things. I believe Jay Robinson, and I think you may have one other one, liaisons to Pinecrest, contract extensions for Anthony's on the Green and New England Golf. These are essentially taking us to the end of when, at the end of this extension, it will be required that I do an RFP for the contract after an extension. If it is granted, we would need to do an RFP for the service after January 1st, 2024 and beyond. We won't have the ability to do any further extensions. Nothing substantive, because an extension can't, significantly redo those contracts without procuring it, which the Golf Course Advisory Committee is not recommending. And that's sort of the highlight of what we have coming this Thursday.
Okay. Mr. Robinson, you have your hand up.
Yep. So, hey, Travis, if memory serves me right, the contract was for 3 years and then 1 year, 2 1-year re-ups. Is that right?
Right. So they've essentially, I indicated, if they want substantive changes, it needs to be procured. I would need to do an RFP. The answer was that they don't want to look at substantive changes right now. They wanted a couple things around the edges. That's fine. So their recommendation is to extend it as far as it can be extended, at which point I made it clear, that's the extent of that. And there would need to be an RFP. Even if the intention is everybody's happy with the vendor, I still will need to legally do an RFP at the end of this extension.
So they're going to extend it for 2 years now versus doing 1 year, come back, 1 year, come back.
Yeah, there was, I will point out, an issue that I pointed out previously is that the contract that had been put together by my predecessor had indicated that it went through December 31st of 2022, that it was 3 years. But when it starts at the beginning of January 2019, it can't be a 3-year contract that goes to the end of 22. That's 4 years. So the understanding was, the way that the documents have been written, was that they went through 22. But I had to point out that that's not the case. So if they want to do the extension through 23, that's fine, but that's the end of it. Everything after that needs to be procured, because that would be 5 years in total, 3 years plus 2 extensions.
Okay. And then in terms of, just to keep it short and sweet, are we going to not put any money into, substantial money into it until it goes out to bid? Like, from a money perspective, was there any discussion about just kind of, lights on for the next couple of years? Or
So the golf
this is
course,
something I want the rest of the board. I mean, I presented this to the board a couple of years ago, so I figured, Ken, just to have a quick chat on this in front of everybody, if you're good with that.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
yeah, so I think the one thing I pointed out, because I think what the golf course, so I would break it into two, right? These are two contracts. One is the maintenance, right? It's actually running a golf course, and one is the food concessions contract. It's running. So I think there had been a conversation on the kitchen and doing some work there. I think, we have done things through the revolving fund with the facilities manager now in place. We procured a couple things like the doors and some of those things. We had done some things like replacing the ice machine and the fryolator and those types of things. And so some of those things are under control. The Golf Course Advisory Committee has looked at a couple issues with the structure of the golf course and the fact that there's drainage issues on a couple holes and those types of things. What I pointed out to the Golf Course Advisory Committee is the current function, the way that town meeting has appropriated or allowed the spending to happen, is that the revolving fund has an annual budget of $200,000 a year. That's flat for the whole operation. Anything charged to the revolving fund is $200,000 a year. Above and beyond that, if they want to do a project that is substantial, needs to be procured, is going to be a capital cost, it would still most likely be charged either to debt that's supported by the revolving fund or directly to the revolving fund. Either way, the annual spending limit of a revolving fund is probably not going to allow them to just do that without a town meeting article, which appropriates out of the revolving fund, or raising the spending limit in a given year to time it with that. So I made that clear. I think there are certainly things the Golf Course Advisory Committee is looking to do on the operation side of keeping the golf course running. And I'm not sure, quite honestly, on anything above what our facilities manager has been able to help the food concession business operate with, things like replacing the ice machine and those things that are us as the landlord to a business. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and Dan's got a question, I think.
Okay, if you're all set, Jay, then go ahead, Dan.
Jay, because mine are on different topics, so if you want to finish this,
I'm good for now. I'll follow up with Travis on anything else, but I just had questions that I wanted everyone to hear, so
yeah,
I think he nailed it.
Yeah, I think we can put this on a future agenda too, because one thing I'd sent to you and Ben Sparrow as the liaisons, which is kind of, just tracking the revenue of the restaurant. One of the things that had been brought up to the town was, the restaurant owner will be interested in changing the way that the fees are collected, building everything into a rent, right? And that's fine. My answer to that was, we can't change structurally the contract without doing the RFP, which nobody's interested in doing right now. That's fine. But that's the answer from a procurement standpoint. Should we look at that and say, well, if we build into rent these types of things, here's what the town is willing to invest in a kitchen. That's a conversation we can have. Where we are right now is a continuation of this contract I sent to you, and we can send to the whole group, the revenue that we did. Obviously, they were impacted by COVID. They came out of COVID relatively well, but I think we can take lessons learned from that. On the golf side of it, there's an escalator in the New England contract. I think the Golf Course Advisory Committee is comfortable with the way that arrangement is written. I think New England's been doing a good job maintaining it, and they certainly have been, as most golf courses have during COVID, doing gangbusters, which is great. Does that change any of the previous conversations about what we can afford through the revolving fund? Potentially. I think we should probably, line up that conversation.
And Ken, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
No, Dan's waiting for you to finish this topic, so go ahead, Jay.
All right, so Ken, there's a money conversation there, because just from past involvement with the golf course, the economics of that golf course, I think, are sounding even better than when I first looked at it. So when I'm hearing from Travis, or I'm getting the impression for this budget cycle, it sounds like it's going to be relatively status quo. But if that changes, how much time do we have for a conversation within the finance committee before we've come up against the deadline for something in the warrant? Are we talking a month?
Well, okay. If you're talking October, I guess the question would be, what is there something planned to come up in October for this? I haven't heard of anything. Travis hasn't presented anything. So in that respect, nothing in the short term. In terms of next May, well, that's, we have till, April of next year to deal with that.
But if they wanted to do something near the end of the year, it sounds like they've got up to $200,000 where they can do stuff, and they're just within their budgetary guidelines. If we hear of anything else, we need to hear about it. It sounds like within the next 2 to 4 weeks. Otherwise, we won't have the cycles to review it.
If they want to do something for October, yes.
That's right. I'm sorry. That's what I meant. If they want to do something for October.
If they want to do something for October, they should have already been talking to Travis about it. But yes, they'd have to do it very quickly.
Well, the warrant is open through September 20th. So,
right.
All right.
So
I heard steady Eddie because I haven't talked to Travis yet. It sounds like I haven't heard anything come up when Travis's thing. So the golf course is probably just
right. That's what I'm saying. So they from a process standpoint, what they should be doing is if they have a matter they want to bring before, yes, to Travis's point, technically they have till September 20th. But, you know, if they were sitting there today saying we will have something we want to bring, then I'd say they should be bringing it to Travis right now if they know what it is, right? And let Travis deal with it. And then Travis would then relay to us in a sense. I mean, you could also as a liaison, but I'm saying that, you know, Travis, if once it's included in Travis's, you know, pre-town meeting preparation stuff, then it would come to us through him anyway, where he'd say there's a request from the advisory committee, or as I said, or you could bring it to the finance committee, and then we'd schedule whether we needed to talk to them and when.
Okay, that's clear. I'm good. I'm ready to move on. So thank you.
I'll just make one point on that. I mean, obviously, Jay, if you remember when you guys presented to us the last time, you know, one of our concerns was that we were being asked for a loan or investment or whatever, you know, on something there where you had declining golf revenue, and whether, you know, the projections were going to be able to support the debt. Right now, we've got a situation where golf revenue is actually higher. The issue there is what, you know, it was going down until it went up because of COVID, and we're sort of not out of COVID entirely. And my concern now would be whether we are levering the golf course up off of a peak EBITDA, if you will. If you know, we're you know, so I just, as everyone sort of looks through this, I don't, you know, I would have some concerns over whether the fact that we were looking at the most recent past and trying to project that into the future, unless we had other data from other sources saying, hey, you know, golf is back, right? Like we're seeing real. So I'm just putting it
when
out
I
there.
presented, Dan, what I had said was that actually they had negotiated kind of like a bumper. Like the revenue was actually higher in this last contract negotiation versus years past. So what I had said back then was there was risk that don't get too comfortable that you're going to make this much revenue. Because what if the next negotiation, like you could guess from the last round, like from a game theory perspective, why New England Golf bid the way they did. And what I said is you can't rely on them bidding the same way. I think to your point that when you look at what's happened with golf, and when you look at the strategy that I can't remember the gentleman's name from New England Golf, why he bid so high on it, I don't think that the betting odds that revenue will not drop off to what it was prior to the last bid. So it's actually the inverse of what you're saying, which is sorry, 1 second. Hey, I'm on TV here, bud. Sorry.
So was he for a minute?
Sorry. Yeah. Welcome to coach. All right, get out. So so it's the opposite, but like
We can have a more
argue, guys.
substantial debate about or discussion about that.
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll have a healthy debate about the golf course, but I think the takeaway is it won't be leading up to October. I think in May I'll be bringing more thoughts to the board, and then you know, where does that go? I'm good. Are you good, Dan?
Just to be fair to Jay, right? The discussion that we had with the golf course, there were two groups, right? He was the one group doing the kitchen/clubhouse thing, and then there was the golf course advisory committee, right?
Right, yeah.
And it was the advisory committee people that were saying that, you know, the revenue is declining, like the numbers didn't match up with it wasn't Jay that was saying the revenue is that was our big issue, is we got two completely different stories, right? So so anyway, we'll hash that out when the time comes. So
News at 11. We're good.
So my points. Oh yes, my points. I can't remember if I mentioned this last week or not, but my request would be that before the select board or even the ARPA committee or the select board approves ARPA requests that have potential for ongoing operating impacts. That for the small little ones, that at least we sort of are informed about them, and that for certainly the larger ones that we actually have a presentation before. So I wanted the schools to present this week. There are, I guess, a number of reasons they couldn't. Well, I'm going to see if we can get them in next week. Because again, not that anything will change, and I am for tuition-free full-day kindergarten, but in principle, but I am concerned about how the sort of anyway, I have my concerns, and I want to address that when they come in. So anyway, my point is, if that while the purview of approving ARPA requests is really ultimately lies with the select board, and before that the steering committee, the steering group, that that there are long-term ramifications potentially for some of these requests to the operating budget, and I want to make sure that the finance committee is fully, not just Dr. Shada, but fully in the loop on what those may or may be. My second point, Travis, is about the potential citizens petition. If it's the one that I'm thinking about, I'm not sure if it's a citizens petition or a request for a special town meeting, but does any citizens petition need to be put onto the warrant, or whatever? But what if it's deemed to be not legal?
Yep, goes right on there.
Goes right on.
It goes on, but I think his question is, what if town meeting acts on a petition that it has no legal
Well, no,
authority?
that wasn't actually my question. My question was, if it's not legal, then I would hope that we could somehow avoid the.
No. So what ends up happening in those instances, and this is not just Holliston, this is everywhere, and it happens more frequently in some towns, is something that essentially becomes non-binding, or is, you have to have essentially town council or the town clerk or both stand up and essentially say, this cannot be enforced for a variety of reasons, and we go through it. If town meeting were to take a stand, right, and say, well, we agree with this person and we're going to do X, Y, or Z, then what ends up happening is the town clerk puts that together, sends it to the AG, and the AG still ends up tossing it out potentially if it's illegal. But if a citizen's petition goes through the correct channels, gets the signatures, which are verified by the town clerk's office, and everything is in order, the select board it goes around that process and it ends up on a warrant.
Okay, I wasn't sure that if it was deemed to be completely, out of bounds, that it could be.
Yeah, there's no way to short circuit it. It shows up on the warrant and then goes from there. At least that's my understanding.
Okay.
And then, so just to respond on the ARPA, I mean, I have no issue in some of these instances that are not time sensitive. We obviously moved on the ones that were, and I think we tried to make that as clear as possible. Obviously, the meeting of the ARPA steering group is available, as was the select board meeting, and the school committee had taken 2 meetings on it. I understand that we'd always want more time to get more public input, and the FinCom is a important part and role in those things, but in some instances, it's just not realistic. As I think we've discussed previously, when it comes to collective bargaining or things like that, I'll always make the effort as much as possible. And the instances that it's not possible, it's unfortunate. But moving forward, I think that's perfectly reasonable request. And I would highlight probably of the only one that is a much different scale than the school request would be the library one that the ARPA steering group listened to last week and is not in front of the select board until this Thursday night, which, I think Leslie McDonald of the library did a good job and essentially is saying, this is the direction that they're going to begin with. She does not have significant concerns that it's going to, require them to cut substantially elsewhere in their budget to make it fit when ARPA is not available. And that, she has proof of concept in the way that they've done these things previously, and they've, used funding from a friends group to get something started and then absorbed it over time into their budget. And so, certainly I can send that request the way that they've written it up for you to review and do those. I believe we made the request, the cover sheet of all the requests public on the website. Although the backup information I don't think is up there, more just because it's just a lot of information and some of it's more readable than others. But that's really the only other one that's come up that sort of impacts budgets after the 3 years.
The only thing I would say is that the tuition free full day kindergarten went through in late July and August, when a lot of people were away and not necessarily paying attention to everything, and it was obviously a huge expense, and with a huge run rate cost that we have yet to have any sort of idea how we're going to cover it coming out of it. So it's just a concern I have going forward, and we'll talk with the schools about it.
Okay, Mr. Robinson, I see your hand up again.
So if and when someone from the school committee comes to meet with us, is it reasonable to expect that they would be laying out the plan of how to fund it, or what's the expectations if and when they meet with us?
So can I just answer
Go ahead,
to
Travis.
the funding? Okay, so the presentation on the funding that was given to the school committee first, and then they made the request to the ARPA steering group. The ARPA steering group received, and then we had up on the screen, but that didn't get into because it had been discussed, is essentially a phase-in of 100% in year 1, 75% in year 2, 50% in year 3 to be covered from ARPA, with, as it is phased out from ARPA, to be built into the school committee's budget. The discussion was obviously the expectation with having this amount of lead time and a balance carrying forward from the revolving fund, which is the way that this program was previously run, will allow them to build it in over more like a 5-year period, which, again, no guarantees in life. There's a number of things that can happen in the next 5 years. But from a perspective on this having been a conversation that's come up many times in Holliston in the past, ARPA really changes the financial outcome here more than could be done otherwise, other than through an override, right? So in a 5-year phase-in period, there is no other real instance where you could conceivably say this can be done without an override. Again, the school committee was, and rightfully so, reticent to guarantee that they can do that. But again, the commitment from the school committee was voiced that they understand this is a priority. They understand, sort of the expectation is that, we're using ARPA to phase it in. And that was, again, relatively understood to be bold, but what they feel like ARPA and the presentation from the superintendent, which is really about, how this is leveling the playing field for students, and to Chief Cassidy, who's checking this against ARPA guidelines, saying, we are trying to make an equitable situation for our children in that age range, which is going to have ramifications for coming out of COVID and those types of things. So they went through all that presentation, but included in that was, this is really the only way to phase in over 5 years that would make it feasible to avoid an override and provide the service.
Travis, there isn't any plan to avoid an override in what they presented. They're going to use the rest of the revolving fund for the tuition account for kindergarten. They're going to use their SR 2 and 3 money. And then in year 5, when the rest of the bill comes due, it's coming due. There is no actual plan to, and this is why I want to talk with them, because there is actually no plan. There's no buy-in from the select board to put an extra $100,000 or something like that a year into the school budget to work in the cost of the tuition for full day kindergarten. There's no buy-in from the schools to try to reduce costs by $100,000. There's nothing until there's just using one-time money for the first 4 years or whatever until the 5th year comes, and there's this big need to this cliff that they have, at least in everything that I've seen published. And so that really is what my concern is, that there is no phase-in approach over 4 or 5 years. It's just we've just got all this extra money, so we're going to just kind of layer in ARPA and then using up the reserves from the tuition account, which makes sense. But then I'm also concerned a little bit about the SR 2 and 3 money and how much of that they're using while we're still sort of in the middle of the pandemic. But that's my point. There really is no phase-in approach. So
Yeah, there is no plan yet. That I would agree with Dan. So they've presented how they're going to get through the next few years, but they need to come up with a plan. And I think that is, they have the luxury of some time, but they still need to do it.
And I just want to reiterate, I am in support of this program. My issues are with the how we've gone about planning to pay for it over the long term. That is, and I think using ARPA was a kind of an interesting and good idea. And probably there would have been no other way of actually doing it because we didn't have any kind of money to give us that phase in time. But there's no, we're not trying to take any pain along the way to phase it in. We're just kind of hoping that something happens over the next, where we can get operating windfall that can cover the $700 plus whatever $1,000 it is, in year 5. So.
Did they present it as hey, we're gonna do full-time kindergarten forever, or did they position it as remediation because of COVID?
No, it's forever. There's no. This is something they've wanted for many years, and there is absolutely no plan to go back to charging tuition. So So that's exactly the reason. And I'll be honest, I raised this issue in the steering group meetings, exactly this issue of, hey, you know, this gives us an opportunity, instead of having to, on any given year, come up with a pile of money to make it happen. It gives us the opportunity to phase it in slowly. But as a result of that benefit, there needs to be a financial plan for avoiding a funding cliff, right? You have the luxury of knowing, of having time to take appropriate steps so that you're not in a situation where you suddenly need this. You know, if they do nothing and we go through the next 4 or 5 years, then we're back at exactly where we were the last 10, which is we got to come up with $700,000 somehow, right? But now you've already gone free, and now it becomes much more of a problem. And I don't think I think that to Mr. Alfred's concerns, right? One of the things that we don't want to see is getting into a position where either the town is forced to find some money by taking it away from other things, or where, you know, the school department is facing things like, you know, cuts of some other kind to make full day kindergarten work, right? One of the reasons it hasn't been implemented to date was because if you sat there and said, here's the available pool of money, and given all your other priorities, you know, the option would have been, okay, we're going to reduce our expenses somehow, you know, cut staff, cut something else, whatever, to get 700,000 freed in the budget. And that's, you know, the point is you have a runway, right? And you need to, Dan's concern, and I share the same concern, is that given the runway, we don't want to pull a Brexit and then start seriously talking about it, you know, the day it's supposed to happen.
It would be, I would expect as a citizen and as someone on the finance committee, like a little bit, not just the Excel exercise, but also want to understand there are benefits to full-time kindergarten in terms of identifying education deficiencies and other educational impairment issues. So the question I would pose it a different way and say that do we see that if we start extended like a full day of kindergarten now, is that going to, in essence, remediate some of the things that would come further down in like second or third grade and may be more expensive and may have to require more services? So in addition to where are you going to find the money, I would be more curious about, explain to me the economic element to.
Jay, there are only a few kids that are actually in full day kindergarten.
So that's right. Just to be clear, Jay, this is not a debate over whether we have full day kindergarten. It's whether it's tuition free or not. Okay. The data, the school committee and the school department can provide you all that data you're asking for in terms of outcomes. But the issue is not, we've been offering full day kindergarten. Only a very small number of kids in town do not go to full day kindergarten right now. It's whether it's tuition free or not.
It was the 700K number, like 700K a year sounds like a relatively healthy number. So that's where I was trying to reconcile.
Yeah, that's because right now you have, you know, I don't know what the current exact rate is, but it's 3,000 something, I think, for kindergarten.
34.95.
Yeah. Okay. So that times the number of kindergarten students in full day is the $700,000 basically, and that's tacking on. There are things in there like the expenses, some of the, you know, but the 700 number comes from making it free, not implementing a new program. It's already there. It's just being paid for by the tuition.
But
and you said few kids. I don't have the numbers committed to memory, but
like less than 10.
Less than 10 are going half day. The rest are all full day.
Okay, so it's just subsidizing, and you're saying it's only 10 more.
Yeah, and the choice, we've heard from Brad last year that the 10 who are doing it are based on family choice. So he said in the past, any person that wants to do full day, they'll find a way to give them full day, regardless of the cost. So
we should definitely wait for the school committee to.
Yes, I was going to say, I don't want to wade into this. I agree with Travis.
But I mean, look, it's important that we do this. There are only 30 some towns or something like that don't offer full day kindergarten tuition.
Free full day kindergarten.
I'm not arguing about the validity, the need of it, the importance of it, to the town, to the community. I mean, $3,500 is a lot to a lot of people. My whole concern is that we have this opportunity through ARPA. We could have structured it in a different way, or we could have looked at it in a different way, or we could have put it, and we still have time to now, even after this, put in place a real sort of cogent sort of buy-in from the select board, buy-in from the school committee, that we're going to set some money aside in some budget, or we're going to try to work over the next 4 years to make sure that we have the capacity within the budget to pay for this when the cliff comes in 4 years. I just don't want to hit, or we're going to say, you know what, we're going to spend the next 4 years convincing the community of how important this is and how important, how important supporting the schools are, and we're going to go and we're going to seek an override to do it. I mean, that's not the optimal solution, but at least we need to, there needs to be a buy-in from everybody that it's not, we're just going to work together later when we need to. We need to start doing that now, because 4 years may seem like a long time, but not when you're trying to build in, $700,000 of capacity.
Yeah. Okay, Michelle?
Just a reminder that, now what was it, 11 years ago, there were grants for classroom teachers, and when those grants ended, the school committee had no way to fund those teachers without the grants. And that was the last override we had, was to keep those teachers, because even though the schools knew that those grants were ending, they had no plan in place at all to keep those teachers.
And I'll give you a great example of planning. What was it, 2010, fiscal year 2010, when the select board implemented the trash fee to help fund a
No,
gap?
that was 2000. That was like 2002.
Oh, 2000, wait, was it 2002?
Hold on, let me finish. And that override passed by what, 6 votes?
12.
In 2010, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the select board, to fill a gap at 1 year in the budget, implemented a trash fee and told the town they were going to work it out over time.
2 years. It was supposed to be a 2-year temporary trash fee.
All right, well, that was before my time. All I know is when I moved down and got on the committee in 2012, it was still there. But we had this plan. We knew up front we were going to take the pains to get it out of the budget over the next 5 years. And every year we took $100,000 or $125,000 from what we were, the select board reduced it because they controlled it, but it was within consultation with the finance committee. So that's what I'm looking for, something like that shows that, that we have a plan to get there, that we sort of know where we're going to try to do the money. We're going to say, this is important to the town. So we're going to put the first $125,000, extra, if you will, not extra, but, of room within the tax levy aside to build up this, into the schools, but whatever it is, but just, we need to figure out a plan.
Right. So, but as I said, with regards to all the things, the educational value, all that stuff, I would defer to the school committee. We're certainly not the experts on the education side of the equation. So, okay, so you good now, Jay?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, so Travis, did you have anything else? Okay. And as Mr. Alfred pointed out, the schools will not be with us tonight because they were unable to make it tonight. So I'll try to reschedule them for a future meeting. So we'll move on to number 4 on our agenda, which is the update from the capital subcommittee. And I'll get back. There's something else we need to cover under our number 2 with the town administrator, but I'll do that at the end. So go ahead, Ben.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shader. So we had our meeting just a few minutes ago. Well, we started at 4, ended at 5:45. We had several presentations. The chief of the fire department, Michael Cassidy, spoke. He brought together several different items he wants to bring before the whole committee, but the subcommittee looked at it. It was a replacement of ambulance, the A3 ambulance, which is the oldest one. It's 15 years old. The replace some equipment, replace the cascade system too. So several different things. We're going to be bringing it before the whole committee, but we haven't taken a vote or anything. We asked them different questions. Then we had James Keese. Sorry, James Keese actually spoke first. You're welcome to watch the wonderful video. But he spoke about different things. The replacement of the handicap access ramp over at 1750 Washington Street. It's old, it's wooden, and it's starting to be a little problems with it. So they're going to replace it with, I believe, a concrete. Correct me if I'm wrong, Travis. Yes. Yeah. So concrete versus the wooden one, make it up to everything. And so It'll be a long-term asset versus the wooden one they have out there right now. Plus the replacement of HVA system, one of the systems, they have multiple systems at town hall, and town hall phone system at different places, including the fire stations. The fire station, which we learned today, still has an analog phone. So this is going to be voice over internet protocol. Plus there's a couple other things we need to go through, but it was a long conversation, but I think it was well received, and we'll bring everything forward once we finalize and we take a vote on the recommendations to the whole committee. And either Dan or Ken can speak, please.
No, I think you summed it up nicely. I don't know if Dan has anything else. There were lots of things considered, and as I said, we'll get to voting on that and bring it to the whole committee.
I just continue to learn about different pieces of 1970s and 1980s equipment that we still have in town.
The fire department is very frugal. We were talked about emergency. Remember that TV show? They still have a unit which we call Jars of Life, but they call it something else. So just if you want to go see an original from Emergency 51, go up to the fire station and ask to see it. I'm sure you'll be amazed.
There you go. So, okay, thank you very much, Vin. Okay, any other liaison updates from other liaisons? The only thing I'll say about the budget subcommittee is we haven't met with them, so there's nothing to update from the schools at this point. I know that the chair of the budget subcommittee from the school committee is trying to put something together for next week, but with school starting, I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to pull off. So we'll see. Okay, I don't see anybody's hands up. Okay, so the last thing on our agenda, which is really under number 2, the update from the town administrator, is, as you recall, we had the policy document we discussed last week, and one of his updates is the updated draft that was sent around. So, I have a couple of questions, and I'm sure that other members do. So raise your hands if you want to start talking about the policies and specific feedback on the latest draft that we received today. Okay, well, you can do it in the thing. I see you, Dan, but I was trying to queue everybody up so I could use the function, but go ahead, Dan.
Well, I didn't need to be first. I just thought everyone was.
Well, I just knew you had comments, so go ahead.
Well, so Travis, I guess a couple of things. One, going back to the OPEB, there were no changes, I guess. There limited changes overall. Also in the Water Enterprise Fund, adding in a thing where we were. Policy that we wouldn't reduce rates. Again, these are just policies. Doesn't mean you necessarily can't do it if you don't. It's not a binding thing. But so just kind of looking to hear your thoughts there. I do appreciate you increasing the reserve account minimum to 300,000.
Yeah. So on the OPEB.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, Travis, but one thing that I just want to interject here before we get too deep is, Travis, just FYI, one thing that was confusing to me was trying to keep track of the multiple revisions. So I wasn't sure what changed without going and comparing documents. So all I would request is that when you make changes, unless I'm missing something, that you do it in a different color or something.
I manually made the red line so that when it's in PDF, it stays in this format. So the changes that I made from the last version that you saw to this version are simply, one of them is reducing the word capital outlay when it's not in quotes to lowercase. Otherwise, it would be highlighted in yellow. So to the point that Dan made, I don't think in these policies for water that the policy should state what we're going to do with the rate. That's an annual process. I don't think can be in the policy or should be in the policy, but it certainly can continue to discuss that. I did not discuss it with the select board. I took the feedback from both of groups and incorporated what I thought could be incorporated. That's one that I think I'd probably have to bring to them.
To be clear, I wasn't telling you what to do with the rate. I guess in some ways, but I wasn't saying it should be increased 5% a year. I was just simply saying that, and in fact, I'm not wasn't suggesting we put in even that it couldn't be reduced. Only that it shouldn't be reduced as long as the infrastructure fee was still being charged. Because if the infrastructure fee is still being charged, in my mind, that means that we still are behind on where we need to be, and therefore we shouldn't be reducing rates.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So you're correct. There's nothing in here for that. For the OPEB, my my thought was the way that that conversation went, this piece that is highlighted in yellow, which I'll pull up here. So this is the version dated today's date, was sent to FinCom and Select Board today. I also did just change the definitions to just be in alphabetical order. No substantive changes except for to put in for the reserve fund, because somebody had a question on the Select Board about this definition, which I said, quite honestly, I hadn't looked at, but the fund is established annually in the omnibus budget. That's why it's established annually. This was the $300,000 that came directly from the FinCom conversation. You saw from my email. My point is it does not impact the 22 budget. I haven't got any feedback from the Select Board yet, although I can continue to discuss with them. Let me just scan down here to the other major section, which is to previously, so we have the OPEB section. Let me scale out here a little bit. So we have the OPEB section, other post-employment benefits. These changes were all the ones we discussed last time. Some of them are simply because of GASB changes. Some of them are updating where we are financially. And so the progress and the discussion was, right, if the OPEB trust committee were to make changes, what that may look like. The retirement fund now wraps in, and this was a discussion we had last time. Again, no change to this section, that the new fund exists. So from the conversation I had with the finance committee last week or the week before, what I took away, and I believe it was a comment from the chair. I can't remember. I believe it was coming from the chair, but was essentially, if what we're doing is situating the fact that the $1.5 million is being set aside for liability. So if the OPEB trust committee were to feel that the FY23 funding schedule is not desirable, enough has changed and is going to make a different funding schedule, that we want to continue to invest the $1.5 million towards these liabilities. And so that was what I had in my notes, and that's what I tried to accomplish here. As I indicated at the time, that was the intention of staff in the way that we wrote this. And what I attached to it today was what we went over last time, which is how that would look if a change were to be made for the FY23 budget. As you'll remember, when this was written and approved 2 years ago, it indicated that we would be looking at it for the FY23 budget. And so that's what I'm sort of putting this in ahead of. If we're to change the schedule, which is under the control of another group, that I think we want to make sure that we're investing the $1.5 million capacity that we have through the omnibus into these liabilities. And to me, the new fund is the way to do that. That is staff's recommendation. So this was the other major change, and creating its own section as an aggregate benchmark of the two is just really to sort of clarify it. Then that obviously changed the final section, which is the appendices.
So I guess though, frankly, actually admit I missed this because I was expecting it to be up above. But if you go back up into the OPEB section above, there's still where is it? No. So there's still the
It's probably down lower in the plan.
in the plan. So in the plan, OPEB will the plan will be revisited every 2 years based upon reporting of the OPEB Trust Board in order to reach full funding not later than 2040. And then when you put in there that the funding schedule for OPEB 2037, beginning in 2023 the budget process, the OPEB Trust Committee will consider adjusting the funding schedule to 2037. So that sort of, I'm not sure why we would do that if we're going to continue over the next 2 years to put in 1.5 million, given that is a 2033 schedule.
The 1.5 million, again, is the aggregate to the two liabilities. So if the OPEB Trust Committee were to look at the funding schedules and the 2037 schedule would require 1.25 million, what we're saying here is that the delta between the 1.5, which has been carried in the budget, and any new schedule would go to the pension fund. So it's still going towards the liabilities.
In 2023?
In FY23.
Right. And so that's what I've been objecting to.
I understand.
So that's why I still have problems with this document.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Murphy.
I like the fact you have a floor there, but I agree with Dan. By us moving shifting our focus from one without just basically moving in the 1.5 and moving 250 into the pension stabilization. I want to go back. I think we should attack the pension stabilization and at the same time the OPEB with the 1.5. Now, not being a member of the committee of the OPEB, I don't know if we've discussed this last week, saying the 1.5 was something we needed to continue. We have a goal. And I'm looking at these numbers. I mean, the end of the year balance, I don't know. I think I'd have to see what the outlie is. And I thought it was not going to 2037 is a good target date, but I'd be hesitant if I believe it. So I thought it was different.
We're 2033 right now. We're 2032 or something like that.
So now we're moving it out to.
Right.
Okay.
So, and I just want to be clear. While the OPEB Trust Committee has the right to make recommendations, that does not mean that our final recommendations to town meeting need to mirror what the OPEB Trust Committee.
No, you can recommend above their schedule, but no, the OPEB Trust Committee is going to adopt a schedule. That's their role. And the budget, certainly the Finance Committee could recommend going above a schedule that is adopted by the OPEB Trust Committee. And that was sort of,
as far as the funding goes, the OPEB Trust Committee, we can adopt the budget or adopt the plan, right? But our final vote on the dollars that town meeting votes on to appropriate and where to appropriate them, it's still our recommendation.
Right. So I think my understanding from the way our conversation sort of started and ended last time was that people generally were comfortable with the concept of if there was going to be changes, that we'd want to make sure that the 1.5 continues to be put towards these liabilities, which my point at the time was that was staff's intention. And I'll try to reiterate that, which is what I did here. Yep. If that's not sort of what we're coming to, I don't really know. I have a feeling, and, it's based on my one involvement in the OPEB Trust Committee last year, and the way that the returns have been, that there is probably not a significant appetite, but I can't speak for everybody, on continuing the schedule and having a 2033 funding schedule when we have a 2037 pension schedule. I went through why that doesn't make sense to me personally, looking at these liabilities side by side. Now that we have a pension fund, I understood it when it was the OPEB Trust had control by the town. We could invest it in PRIT and control it ourselves, versus, overcommitting to the Middlesex County retirement system. Now that the town has access to an alternative where it can fund the pension liability, which is, in my opinion, a better investment and a better way to set aside dollars, I don't think it makes sense anymore. And that's sort of the idea, but I may have misunderstood where our conversation went last
time. It's the same investment. I think Vin and I are both on the same wavelength. We would rather be additive, using free cash, at least at first, to supplement the retirement system and keep the 1.5 going into OPEB. So, I would much rather see that we rewrite this, that they can even, if they want to, shrink the funding schedule to 2033 if they want for the retirement system, and we can start putting, excess free cash.
You know what I think would be helpful is seeing the liability, because that's the nut we're looking at, and we don't see that. We see the balance of the trust funds and the estimated what we have for the pension stabilization fund and all that, but the liabilities, the big huge thing, and elephant in the table or in the room that we need to conquer, and that's hanging out there for S&P 500's looking at it, and all the other, or S&P, not S&P 500. So is that can we look at that and then have another discussion so we can say, yes, we really need to focus before we put this to bed? Because I'm really concerned. I think, as we've done in the past, we want to avoid what we've done in the past, which is basically, we'll worry about it another day. I think we need to be disciplined and said, this is something we need to worry about.
I'm not saying don't worry about it. I'm just saying for 10 years we've been telling the town.
No, I agree. Dan, I'm totally agreeing, but I think we need to look at the numbers and look at the liability, because I
just want to make sure Travis is clear that what you're saying is not taking away the 1.5. We still need to address it, but we need to address it with free cash or other funding sources.
I believe we do. I mean, unless, give me a good argument why we should reduce it, but I highly doubt it. But it's hard for me to really look at it without looking at the whole liability, because that's the thing that's out there. And also looking at the assumptions going into the trust fund, because things may change. We keep adding staff. That's going to affect the liability out there.
Yeah. So let me just reiterate sort of what I said last time, which again is in terms of these two liabilities, you're right. And from an actuarially speaking, the liability, which you can see here down, and this is just because GASB changed the way that it does these things. So when I'm trying to keep apples to apples and I'm pulling it out of audit, these are the 4 years where the audits were done the same way since GASB made changes. And so let me just be clear. What I'm saying is I understand that these liabilities are substantial. They're going to increase. What I'm saying is if you have the ability to put money towards your pension liability, which is definable and can be calculated within reason in an actuarial study, it is a better way to put your money aside than to put it towards OPEB, which even as you continue to refer to the actuarial liability is based on assumptions of what healthcare is going to cost, which is a very difficult thing to pinpoint. So now that there is an ability to address pension, it's my opinion that that is the way to go now that we have established that fund. And again, as was reiterated last time, and again, why I thought we were sort of going in the same direction is that either way, these funds are going to PRIT. We're investing it in those in that vehicle. And it really, again, comes down to the pension. Now that we have that system is the way to go. And again, I mean, I don't have to reiterate it again, but so these are the numbers that you were asking about. These are from the audits. I'll have at least a version of the most updated one coming soon. The contributions, this was from the beginning of when
I'm thinking more of the future. I mean, grant you future is hard to say, but that's the nut we're looking at, because that I see the balances of what we're funding, but there's a projection of what the liability will be out there. And then the analysis, well, if we contribute this, we're going to offset it. So that liability is growing. And so we got to get to a point where we're fully funded sooner than later, in my opinion. And so the question, hey, let's move it over because now we have I totally understand what you're saying, but at the same time, we have discipline now. I think we should be disciplined and adding rather than supplanting or moving funds from OPEB to pension. This is my thought, and I won't continue, but I think looking at it next to what the actuaries have out there for the future, for the OPEB and also the pension, we do something like that and say, okay, this is where we look and this is where we're going to be fully funded. And we play around with it, but okay. So
I think that I would much rather do just for right now start at least do 2 more years of 1.5 into OPEB and then find extra money to put from free cash into the pension account, and then we can revisit in 2 years.
Right. I would concur with that only because I would say that with high probability we'll have at least 250 in free cash if we budgeted correctly. So if the issue is, hey, 250, we want to put 250 into pension, we can certainly do that through free cash, I think, easily in the next 2 years. So, okay, now, Mr. Robinson, I know I'm going slightly out of order, Michelle, but I accidentally lowered Jay's hand, so I'm going to let him go first.
No, I just lowered it. So go ahead, Michelle. Ladies first.
I just want to reiterate what I said last week, and I think we have an obligation to all of the retirees, and I just hate the thought of diverting money from a group that includes every retiree, which is OPEB, and going to a group that doesn't include the majority of retirees, which is the Middlesex County Retirement. And that's, aside from everything else we've said, that's what bothers me more than anything else about this.
The 5D fund does not sit with the Middlesex County Retirement System, but I understand, and I heard your point last week as well.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Thank you.
So I think what will be helpful for me, because again, based on our conversation last week, if the Finance Committee could send some suggested edits, this was obviously, as I indicated, staff recommended changes to the policies. Ideally what we need to have, hopefully by the end of the calendar year, is a policy that will be supported by the Select Board and the Finance Committee. That's what S&P wants to see. And that's what we promised them. So if you could send your recommended edits, we will try to continue to work forward.
Okay, now go ahead, Mr. Robinson. You're now.
Yeah, so I didn't want to interrupt earlier. So Dan, I was trying to keep up with you, and it's on the top page 7, where you were talking about, you're like, hey, this is where you're not aligned. So I think I caught up to you guys since I originally raised my hand, but are you been saying basically you want to still route the 1.5 to OPEB, and in addition put more money away to the pension? For like, is that where you're like, I was trying to keep up with what your objection was.
The big objection was adjusting the funding schedule. You see that line, the third red line, or actually the fourth red line. The trust committee will consider adjusting the funding schedule for OPEB to 2037.
Yeah.
So by doing that, essentially they're going to be able to reduce the 1.5 starting next year to 1.25 and take the additional 250,000 and put it into the pension. I don't disagree that we should be funding the pension. What I think that I want to keep the 2033 funding schedule, which is what we've been telling the town we've been doing. We've been telling every committee who's come and tried to say, hey, just take money from OPEB to fund us. That is what we've been doing. And instead of doing that, keep, at least for the next 2 years, and granted, I think that even after 2 years, I'm going to want to continue doing it further, but we'll see how this works, is at least for the next 2 years, keep the 1.5 going into the OPEB with the 2033 funding schedule, or whatever the funding schedule is that we've been using to date.
Yeah.
And then say, the add in, and this is what, Travis, we talked about this last week, add in language that basically says the town will use at a minimum $250,000 of free cash to fund the pension liability as well. And since we know that we have always had $250,000 of free cash every year, in fact, the lowest it's been in the last 10 years has been $690,000, and that was actually sort of somewhat of an anomaly. And many years it's actually been over $2 million that will be able to fund that. So we'll be able to get the $250,000 that Travis is suggesting that we start putting into the pension fund, and we'll be able to keep the 1.5. At the same time, if big emergencies or big expenses come up, and then we need, we do need to end up not being, we aren't able to fulfill that sort of that policy, which is not ideal. Obviously, once you write it as a policy, you do have the discretion to not have to do it. And that's what I mean by we'll see how that works. Because if we can keep the 1.5 for the next 2 years in OPEB and put 250, maybe 500,000, even 1 year, something like that, into the pension fund, it may actually be a better way of funding it than shifting money around, because we're actually able to sort of meet both of those obligations rather than try to sort of shift things around. That's my proposal.
Is the concern that as a guiding principle or policy that we're, just to keep the math simple, taking another 250 out of free cash, that now that's 250K that you can't allocate elsewhere? Is the concern about
we've been
pegging free cash to the pension?
Well, we've been putting the free cash into capital, and we've been accused of putting too much money into capital. We've been putting, so I mean, it's one of these things where, like, in some ways it would be better if we weren't putting it into capital or other sort of, not unrestricted, but other sort of fund balances, right? Because we don't have a necessary use for it right now. So, and we're always higher than that. So I don't think that this is a case where,
I'm just asking more, Dan. I'm asking more, Travis. It's taking $250,000 out. No, that's all right. It's all right. Taking 250K out of free cash that, like you just said, could be allocated to capital. So is it a concern, Travis, that from where you sit, you're like, it's like a $250 out, taking money out of your wallet that you would be using for other capital expenditures that you see that the town's going to need? Is that where the concern is, of putting a policy in place saying the 1.5 stays to OPEB, plus we're as a policy, we're always going to take 250K out of free cash, and that's 250K that you're not going to be able to invest in capital? Is that where the concern is? It's going to, that Dan's ask is going to conflict with some other capital strategy that you and the board are trying to implement?
So, right, looking at the finance policies holistically, we've made some changes from the finance staff's perspective that, is relatively aggressive. And from those who are looking for increases in operational investments from a budget perspective, right, we've committed $1.5 million to OPEB. We've committed 1.75 million in the FY22 budget to put from tax levy into the capital expenditure fund, and then we go into the fall cycle and we use free cash for these things. The town has been very aggressive, and what that does leave is some concerns of keeping up with a growing town in some regards. We've addressed that. The finance committee has discussed it in numerous occasions, and so yes, my perspective is simply adding on top of 1.5 to Vin and Dan's point. Sure, that sounds great. I mean, I love reserves as much as anybody. But is that a viable answer? No, I don't think it is. I think, again, what we tried to highlight here is, and what I think we discussed last time is, does it make sense when you look at it holistically to say that the OPEB trust fund has a funding schedule of 2033, which requires a $1.5 million annual contribution? Does that make sense in the context of us having a pension liability, which are two liabilities we have related to retirees, and they're, in my opinion, one is a better investment than the other, and saying one should stay on the 2033 because that's a funding schedule we created at one point in time, and we want to stick with it, as opposed to saying we have two liabilities, we now have another way to address pension. It makes more sense to time those two funding schedules from an actuarial perspective. Again, every 2 years, those actuarials get updated. Now the balance of OPEB is impacting sort of the outlook as well, as will the balance of this pension fund over time. My perspective to your question, Jay, is yes, just adding on top of the 1.5 million is beginning to cut into our ability to keep up with other things that are needs in the town. Is my perspective.
Hold on a second though, Travis, because you're now conflating free cash with operating spending. We can't, come on, that don't, let's not go down there.
So here's the thing. But this is the thing that you understand too, Dan, right? We could increase the benefits budget that currently has the 1.5 million into OPEB. We could increase that budget by $250,000 by increasing our assumption on local receipts. What that's going to do is eventually lead to $250,000 less being generated in free cash through a process that every town uses, right? So what I'm saying is I'm cutting out the middleman and I'm having a bird's eye view conversation, but I think we're talking about the same thing.
And make the 250 squishier then, make it a recommendation that 250 of free cash based upon other, needs in town, so that it's not, I'm not trying to take anybody's operating money. In fact, I mean, look, if everyone's so concerned about having enough money in the operating budget to fund all these other costs and needs that we have in town, then perhaps more thought should have gone into tuition-free full-day kindergarten that was going to leave us with a $650,000 nut in 4 years. I mean, that right there is spending a huge amount of money that, I mean, come on, let's be honest. We know the schools aren't going to be able to cut $650,000 from their budget, nor would we really probably want them to. So we know at the end of the day that the town is going to have to come up with that money in one way or the other, and it's going to be through an override, or it's going to be through us being disciplined and coming up with a way of building that into the budget. So, I mean, as great as tuition-free full-day kindergarten is, these decisions are being made now. And not even really framed in that. So I don't, this whole sort of like, we're going to try to use $250,000 from free cash to fund to supplement, to put into the pension fund. And then you're saying, well, I could do that by, raising local receipts. I mean, that conversation should have been had about tuition-free full-day kindergarten. And I watched the select board meeting, and there was no real conversation about what it actually meant to the budget over the next 4 years. So if that really is a concern about the people at town hall, then other things should be thought of as well in that context.
Well, there are other things. Okay, I don't want to get. Let's try to stay focused. I mean.
I was trying to get to the language. So I think Dan, I caught up to you. I think that I think the question is to get back to like a hard deliverable, which is feedback on this document. Like, to me, what Dan and Vin said resonates with me. And at the same time, we want to make sure we don't handcuff Travis and his organization to invest in the town so that we have a fully funded pension and crumbling buildings. And I think what you called out, Dan, about full day kindergarten, I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, but from a guiding principle perspective, to me, I would leave it out and have this document be a framework so that when these types of things come up, we could at least point to this document and say, we're trying to put money towards OPEB and pension, and now where does this come in? Instead of putting this all together into one big snowball and shaking it, I'm like, hey, let's come up with guiding principles for this.
Just to be clear again, though, I do not disagree that we should have implemented for full day kindergarten. I just want to make sure.
I think that's clear, but all I'm saying is leave it out of the conversation, and let's like, I was trying to understand, ignoring the kindergarten conversation. Like, I like your idea. Now I've caught up to you. I like that. Like, hey, let's put money away for retirement, but where I was trying to understand Travis's concerns, and I think you kind of got there until we were talking about the school committee thing again, which is that maybe we somehow, I wouldn't say squishy, I would say flexible language to say that, whenever possible, our posture is that we want to also contribute to the pension. So now we have it then. So like, Ken, you guys would come up with the wording better than me, and I could suggest anything, but I'm on board with trying to hit both. And then putting in language saying, as long as, like in agreement with the town administrator or whatever, like we don't want to handcuff Travis, but we also want to make sure that we have guiding principles that everyone can point to say we're going in the agreed upon direction.
Okay, well, let me just let Travis wants to make a comment on that. So let me just let Travis go first.
Just because we didn't have Jay last time. So, and I think at one point, because we had kind of this conversation to a certain extent, which is there's now one more pot, which is the pension fund to feed of all of the reserves that are laid out in this policy. And again, to the point that I tried to make last week, is the finance staff understands the goals of the finance committee, and sort of was raising the bar on general stabilization, not sort of understanding the commitment to CapEx and all those types of things. And so one thing I think that which I removed from the end of this document because it was more just a reminder, and we did have the conversation last week, was one thing to potentially remove one pot that needs to be thought of every single time we allocate money is the general stabilization fund. So one thing that we could do in this October, which I'm not speaking for the select board, but I believe that they're interested in coming up with a long-term solution here, is dedicating cannabis revenue to the general stabilization fund. That takes one mouth to feed out of the equation every time we're divvying up free cash or looking at or what we can do through operating costs in the May cycle. Does that make sense to sort of add this to the conversation? And then all of a sudden saying every time we get free cash certified by DLS, we're going to put, Dan mentioned 250 out of free cash this time. I think Dan also mentioned last time it might have been a percentage of free cash when it's certified goes into that fund, right? That's another potential mechanism. And then if one of the funds, the general stabilization, that we need to keep at a certain rate, the finance staff is, sort of indicating this is what S&P wants to see, is taken care of through a repeating revenue source, so that we don't have to always be concerned about balancing it, or, it's really just it is literally just balancing it and not getting it up to a certain level. Then that might be something that we should bring into this equation now, because I think the concern that I would have is just adding on, just saying we're going to do this above the 1.5 million. I think is I get why people would want to do it. I just don't think it makes sense. If you add in the cannabis equation and say here's what this is going to be dedicated for, then maybe that does change the whole snow globe.
Well, hold the cannabis question, because that may be needed for the schools. But again, shifting to a 2037 schedule, because the other one is in the 2037 schedule, and that just sort of what makes sense to you. Pension plans have been using 8% for years when everyone knows it's not 8%. So, I think just to Frank, I will not vote in favor of something that lengthens the funding schedule at this time for the OPEB, the recommendation for OPEB and diverts money from OPEB. It's just we've made promises to the town. We've made 10. I think it would confuse everybody. It would send the wrong message. I understand what you're getting at. It's just not the way that I think that we should do it, and I think we should use free cash when we have it available, and not also to say that we should make decisions on the front end to ensure that we have the money in free cash. I think if we end up not having the free cash to spend on it, then that year you don't have it. That's why, again, I wanted 2 years to see how it works out. But anyway.
Yes. Well, the other thing that I'll point out is that from a budgetary perspective, right, the state best practices recommend that we budget for 5% free cash, right? So, part of me says if we get to the point where we have no free cash and it's absent a severe disruption of something that causes that, then we're not budgeting correctly, right? That means we're spending too much money. We're not, if we jack our local receipt estimates up, $1 million and then say, okay, let's go spend it, and then we have no free cash, then I think, that's on us, right? I think $250,000 out of a 70 million plus budget, right? We should absolutely make sure that our budgeting is resulting in that much free cash on an annual basis. So anyway, Michelle, I didn't mean to, you had the comment, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to just let Travis jump in there.
Oh, I thought I was muted. Jay, you had said about handcuffing Travis, but we're the ones that present the budget to town meeting. I just wanted to remind you.
Okay, I'm not even going to touch that third rail, but
I just,
for now, right? But either way, like, I'm just saying, like, Team Travis, like, they're our trusted professionals that, we're volunteers. They're our trusted professionals that are saying, like,
I
here's
know.
the money I need, and here's how we're going to operate. So, like, I don't want to get into a debate about, I don't even want to touch that, but all I'm saying is I'm just trying to understand from Travis's viewpoint.
No, I'm not.
If we put a
arguing.
principle in to say we're going to save money towards OPEB, and we also want to pay towards the pension, am I robbing from Peter to pay Paul, or what's the opportunity cost of doing that? That's really the nature of the question versus who owns the budget. Like, I don't even want to get into that.
Hold on a second, though, Jay, I do have to push back. I mean, nothing against our financial professionals. They're wonderful, smart, hardworking people. But I worked in finance for 20 years. I have a chartered financial analyst designation. I have an MBA in finance. I am about as much of a financial professional as you get as well. So, look, these are our hired town staff. They're wonderful. They're professionals. They do a great job. But to just say that we're gonna defer to them because they're financial professionals, that to me is abrogating our responsibility.
I don't think I ever remember. I don't think, and this is recorded, that I used the term defer. What just happened before was I asked your viewpoint, Dan. I tried to understand what you and Vincent asked. And then I asked Travis for his viewpoint to understand his point of view. And I said that your viewpoint is absolutely reasonable. And I think Travis is reasonable. And all I'm saying is just as you are a very talented financial individual, like I think
I've done it for a while. I don't know if I'm talented.
All I'm getting at, Dan, is that I'm just trying to understand the other side of the equation. And I'm not trying to get into who owns the budget and who's the smartest person in the room.
The term financial professional probably caused me to react a little bit more than I needed to because it become a hot button.
I am deferring to town meeting.
It was a little bit.
Vote. That's what I'm deferring to.
Okay, so
but
let me just,
and Ken has educated me on this, that we are like the citizens, right? We are citizens that have a financial lens and are advocating for the town, right? Like, we're spending a lot more reps on these subjects than the average citizen. And so all I'm getting at is, like, we're this document that we started with, it's like, what is our recommendation to the town of guiding principles? That's where I was going.
okay.
And trying to understand Travis's point of view. I think we beat it to death.
Yes, I know. I think in that sense we have. But just to enlighten you, Jay, just to enlighten you on the history here, while the document has now become kind of a town-wide document, which is a good thing, okay, the document was started out as the Finance Committee's policies. It started out as a document created by us to say, this is how, so everybody understands how we budget, how we look at funding for different sources and blah, 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 those kinds of things. Yep. We laid out that policy document. Okay. It's now kind of morphed into a townwide document, but I just want to be clear, this was never the town's guide. It's becoming guiding principles for financial decision-making, but but it was originally intended for us to communicate to the town, this is the way we make financial decisions. Okay. So it's good. And as I said, I'm not arguing against the way it's become. That's a good thing. But just so you understand the history is that it was a finance committee document solely and it's in its first
And if
incarnation.
I can give credit to Beth Liberty because she put a
Yes.
lot of work into it.
Yes. Go ahead, Travis, and then I'll get to you, Dan.
Just
And
want to make sure.
nothing against Travis. I just want to say it's,
Yes.
No, and I just want to make sure because I've heard that point before, and I appreciate how it started out. It would be very bad for the town as a whole, not just the finance committee, not just select board, but everybody, if we were unable to come to a document that is a town document now. How it started
Correct.
is fine, but we are now in a place where the expectation from S&P and everybody is that we have a document that we are all behind. So I need a vote from the select board on it. I need a vote from the finance committee on it. I fully, and I tried to express this last week and I'm expressing again, staff understands, and is familiar with the expectations of the finance committee. This was an attempt to meet those. I understand that you disagree on some of these. You send me the recommendations to see if I can put together something that works for everybody. But there are other interests here besides just the finance committee as well, including an OPEB trust committee that, again, to the conversation we had earlier, if the schedule that's adopted by them is not what we end up appropriating because there's a recommendation for a higher appropriation, that's fine, but that is a possibility. So long as we have a document that everybody supports here, we need to continue to put that out to S&P. That's the expectation outside of the town from us.
Yes. No, I totally concur. That's why I said it's a good thing that it became a town document. But I just think that I just wanted to make sure that it was clear to Jay as a new member that this wasn't something that came to us. This was something that we provided to the town that has morphed into a townwide document as it should. So, Mr. Alfred, you're first, and then Mr. Robinson.
So two things. One, just last thing I know, appreciate that. Definitely want to come up with a document that is adopted by everyone so that we're all we all benefit from S&P's rating. But for me, my red line is changing the 2033 funding schedule and moving the 1.5 around. I'd like to find other ways of getting money into the pension plan, even if it's just for the next 2 years, and then we can reevaluate. But that is that's a red line for me. The other thing I just realized, I noticed that wasn't changed that I made a recommendation for was the change from budgeting 2% of the omnibus to 3 to 5% of the omnibus. Did you have a chance to look at that?
Yeah, I just had a comment before I forget it on the first point. Just to clarify what you just said, if a schedule for 2033 called for less than $1.5 million, you are in full agreement that $1.5 million should not be put into the OPEB trust fund?
Schedule for 2033 said less than 1.5 million. I wouldn't say it should not be put into the OPEB trust fund, but I would say that I would be willing to discuss moving that into the other account. Sure. I mean, if we're keeping the same funding schedule, I'm open to considering changes to it. I'm not going to close any of those doors, but I don't want to be purposely lengthening our funding schedule up front while we're still got to have runway.
Okay, and then the second question was about 2% of which one?
So on page 4, I think it's 4. Yeah, 4. Plan, the town will maintain a goal of budgeting 2% of the omnibus.
For the annual capital?
Right, so 2% sets it at, let's say, 1.3. Let's say higher than.
We were at 2.8 this year, so I was suggesting that given the $700,000 that is potentially for sidewalks and all the other capital needs in the town, that since we were basically at 3, that we sort of make the goal 3.
Okay, so you're looping together what we do in May out of levy, which was 1.75 in FY22, and then what we do in free cash as well. You're putting those two together and you're saying you want that to be. So my only concern with any of these policies, and this is not specific to this particular question, is what point in time are we checking in on whether or not we're within policy guidelines? and what document am I using on an annual basis for an apples to apples? So are you saying of the omnibus budget, when it comes down to what we put in May and October combined, is that what you're using as a benchmark, as the 3%?
I think it was 2.8. The 1.75 was 2.8, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, I'm using what we put into the spreadsheet in May. As between these, we're basically at 3%. So I'm just simply saying let's set it to be between 3 and 5%.
So, but he's saying minimum. So you want a range?
No, minimum 3%. So the goal would be 3 to 5%. You could certainly spend more, but 3% is the minimum, which would be just slightly higher than what we did last year.
So you're essentially trying to back into the 2 million. Okay. Yeah. Again, if you could, as a group, I mean, it would be more beneficial if you could, as a group, make these, votes as a recommendations of the group, and then send me these edits, and I can put them together as a draft. That would be great.
Yeah. Can I suggest that Dan make the edits and then we vote next week? Or unless we have it, just we have it all written down. Is that okay?
I'm happy to make the edits. I sometimes having multiple owners of a document making edits.
No, I mean, you make the edits based on what you're saying, and then we vote on it.
Right. What Travis is basically saying, I look at it like a conference committee, right? The select board has voted what they want, we vote what we want, and then we go from there.
Okay. I'll talk to you about how to make the edits so that we can keep what's there and track all the changes.
Yep.
And
Okay.
have it so that it's
Travis, can you give me the Word version? Of this?
Word.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we vote on a clean copy, right? So we know what.
Yes, what we'll vote on, once the edits are made and we agree on what edits we would like to see, we will vote on that document and provide it to Travis and say, this is what we would like to see.
So, but then we should talk about, because I don't want to, I don't want to, we can pass around the document, obviously, and people can come up with suggestions, and I can certainly do that. But of the things that sort of I've suggested tonight, and in the effort of compromise, if Travis doesn't like the water thing, that's not a sticking point for me. I think it's something that makes sense, but I'm in the effort to compromise.
Why don't we?
I was going to say, let us produce a document, and then when we do it, we will discuss it, and Travis will be here to hear the discussion, and we can.
No. But my point is, do we have time? I thought Travis wanted to vote ASAP on it, so I thought if we.
No, I think you said S&P, not ASAP. No, just kidding.
Okay, so Travis, if I put together a document, circulate it, people come with comments, with that, the finance committee.
You can't circulate it.
No. I circulate it, and then at the next meeting,
yes,
we have a conversation about it to come up with and take, figure out where everyone lays on all the.
Yes, that's exactly the point.
That's within the time frame. That's within the time frame that you're okay.
Travis, when do you need our feedback by? I think that's what he's trying to ask.
Yeah, so I think what we covered last time, right? And at the bottom of the document, you see this has been approved in August, September, October, November, December, and February in the past, right? So we're not like up against the gun by any means. My hope in what I thought was taking some feedback from last time and circulating another draft is that we would get through this quickly. If we're not going to, that's fine. So at your next meeting, at the meeting after that, if you're able to get me feedback, the select board was comfortable with this group, so I'm going to have to go back to them as well. So I think at this point, let's try to go about it as you give edits from the finance committee, and we'll, as Dr. Shada said, conference committee this thing. And if at some point we just need to put everybody together in a room or on a Zoom, then we'll end up doing that.
So it's the select board is pencils down on this document right now. Is that what?
At the moment, yes.
Okay. Right.
They provided some edits, but not of the substantive ones that you have.
Okay. And then just going back to something we talked about a while ago, this document, right, is an artifact, a town artifact of but like basically curated by the select board at this point, by the finance committee. And does the OPEB committee are they also going to use this, to serve as their guiding principles? Like, do we need these three groups to all be on the same page?
So the OPEB trust committee is sort of set up the way that MGL sets it up. And what I tried to do here was not speak for the OPEB trust committee. I am the chair of it. But essentially say, look, at some point, if there aren't 3 votes of the OPEB Trust Committee to continue a 2033 schedule. It's possible that they adopt a schedule that is not 2033. And, part of that conversation is then that doesn't mean, just like we could super fund what we're annually required to contribute to the Middlesex County retirement system, but we didn't want to do because we don't want to overcommit to them. The town could choose to say, here's what the schedule that was adopted by the OPEB Trust Committee is, and here's what we want to do. So I guess my point and the way that it had been tried to be written in this policy was the OPEB Trust Committee is going to do what they're going to do. And this policy was kind of referencing the fact that may change. And if it did, that we would be flexible in saying if it reduces the 1.5, we would put it over here. Again, and I won't beat that horse again. So
yeah.
I don't think they need to be looked in this conversation because they're actors from numerous groups, but I'm just trying to mention in this policy that they are a separate actor.
Are members of the Finance Committee normal members of the OPEB Trust Committee and other communities?
I'm not in the communities that I've worked in.
Not in the communities working. Okay, because at the same time, you are, as you said, the chair of the OPEB Trust Committee, and you are in some ways trying to write the policies to fit with what you think is what you are going to want to suggest to the OPEB Trust Committee, correct?
I am looking at what I believe, these actuarial studies are doing. I'm looking at what Gatsby's doing, and I'm saying, it's very possible that, again, on a biannual basis, especially if our OPEB trust balance goes up substantially, that the $1.5 million that you are all very tied to, understandably, may go down. And this policy would be a way for us to say $1.5 million, if it's not going to the OPEB trust, still needs to be going to our liabilities. I think it was
I appreciate that.
That is favorable to what my understanding of your priorities is. That was the intent. I understand that, the opposite end of this is the conversation right now, but anyway.
I would just, say that of the select board members, the OPEB Trust Committee members, and the Finance Committee members, there are only, Ken actually maybe the only member who was actually there from the very beginning of the whole creation of the OPEB Trust. Michelle came along fairly soon thereafter, and then I came along just as we were starting to actually be able to implement it. And so there is some sort of, sense of understanding of the history there that many others, don't necessarily appreciate, and nor has of other groups dealt with the body blows from other areas of town trying to sort of pick off the OPEB trust money over the years. So there definitely is a heightened sensitivity.
So if we align, I'm going to take a leap of faith that the wording we come up with, Travis, will be acceptable to the select board. If we take that leap of faith and the Finance Committee and the Select Board say, like, this is agreed upon language for a town document, does that help the OPEB committee to basically be respectful of the Select Board and the Finance Committee? Like, or has this just become a piece of paper that the OPEB committee could just ignore or use as toilet paper? Like, I'm trying to get my arms around, like, we're going to come up with, we're going to go through this exercise, we're going to wordsmith this document, I'm going to take a leap of faith that we're going to edit it for the select board, and then we're going to say, here are our guiding principles. But how do we know that they're going to be followed or at least acknowledged? I guess that's where my head is at this point.
Right. So, I mean, this is my point is, and this is the same point, I guess, on Dan's question on the water rates. To set a policy that says what the select board, who sets the water rates by the way the town is set up, is not, in my opinion, the right way to approach this policy. To set something saying the OPEB Trust Committee is going to do X is not appropriate use of the policy, in my opinion. What this did, the way that it was, written as a recommendation, would be to say, if the OPEB Trust Committee wanted to reduce the funding of OPEB, and that's the way the budget went, fine, but that's the purview of the OPEB Trust Committee. The $1.5 million is the purview of the whole town. and to reappropriate any delta between the 1.5 and what the new schedule was to another liability that we are also very concerned about is to say, we understand the OPEB Trust Committee needs to do its job. And if it were to make a recommendation to reduce or change the schedule, that it is then the town's responsibility to say, here's what we want to do with that delta, which is address another significant liability. So do you understand where I'm coming from? I think I answered your question, which is, yeah, the policy should not dictate to the people whose responsibility it is to set the schedule. But if they were to drop it and then the Finance Committee's recommendation is to continue to do 1.5, even if the schedule calls for 1.25, that's a separate conversation.
I gotta think there's language, Travis, that will address what Dan's saying, which is that to not like prematurely reduce that number to basically take away from the progress of chipping away to OPEB, like as a guiding principle. I think that's the concern. It's like, yeah, we don't want to handcuff the town professionals. We don't want to handcuff OPEB, but we also want to say like this is our intention. We're not going to tell you tit for tat how to do your job, but it's like, you know, just like in the corporate world, it's like when a budget is given, it's like, all right, these are the guiding principles around how you're going to spend the money. We're not going to watch the pennies, but we're giving you money or blessing you to spend money based on these principles. So that's where maybe can we put principles into this document that isn't handcuffing the OPEB committee, but also addressing Dan's concern that we're not prematurely knocking down that 1.5 million number unless there's like a justifiable reason for doing so.
Well, I think Dan's issue is that, well, he's also said, but the 2037 versus 2033. And he also said, okay, if that lowers it, but I still want to have the reserve to look at moving the money over. So yeah, he's somewhat hardened to the 1.5, but I think he might be willing to look at it. So I think that's part of it.
If it comes in and we're at 2033, then I'll write this in. I think this is maybe where the compromise may be coming out, and to Travis's sort of with his idea is, first of all, these numbers have been in the policies before. We're not handcuffing the OPEB Trust Committee. They can make any recommendation that they want for the funding schedule that they want to adopt. But just like any other budget, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Finance Committee needs to adopt that recommendation within our recommendation to town meeting. But to give to the flexibility, if, you know, I mean, look, the life expectancy of adults has dropped by like a year over the past year due to COVID, right? So when, you know, new actuarial tables come out, it could very well be that you know the required contribution drops even to keep it at 2033. If we can keep it at 2033, which is the schedule that we've been keeping it at, and the 1.5 ends up dropping, I'm more than open to at least having the conversation and talking about it, looking at all the different factors at that time. I'm not going to certainly commit to say at 2033 we'll take whatever the schedule says, because I don't know why the schedule dropped, what else is going on, but it certainly is a fair conversation to have, because if what we've been saying all along over the past couple of weeks is that we don't want to reduce the maturity date of the mortgage, right? We don't want to keep refinancing the mortgage to a later maturity date, but all of a sudden, you know, the bank error in your favor or whatever, and you can keep that same maturity date but pay less, you know, refinance the rate, whatever, you know, whatever. It's a fair conversation to have, and I'm not, you know, going to be it wouldn't be I don't think I would be doing my job to not be open-minded to something like that. I don't know where everyone else is, obviously, but that's my own opinion.
Yeah, and now, you know, since Dan, you mentioned that I have the history here going back to the beginning of OPEB. I will point out, just for everybody's education, that when we discussed the original liabilities way back, and I think it was probably around 2011 or 12, I'd have to go look, when we were putting in place the OPEB trust, it was acknowledged that we'd need to put away 2.5 million according to the then actuarial data on retirement and OPEB. So that was actually in our warrant message. Again, I'd have to go dig up what year, where we said that the analysis was showing we need to put a combined 2.5 million into OPEB plus pension. So while we're having this discussion, and it's certainly a good one, that we're in a position where we're talking about 1.5 million, you know, there was discussion that there was going to be more money needed for pension way back at the beginning, $1 million more that we haven't had to put away because we've been getting to this point. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say if we want to put $250,000 a year into pension, whether it's from free cash or some other source, that would be surprising, given that this was, it's still below what we told the town we were going to need to meet both obligations. But that's just a side historical note there. But Michelle, you had your next.
Yeah, I just wanted to read this. This is from the first paragraph of the financial policies. It says the intent of these financial policies is that they serve as a guide for policymakers, administrators, department heads, and advisors, recognizing that town meeting retains full right to appropriate funds and incur debts, so forth. But I just want to highlight that it says it serves as a guide. It's not a law. It's not a statute. This document is just a guide. So we're not restraining anyone. If something comes up and, if we put something in there about free cash and free cash isn't what it's expected to be, we're not obligated, to do something. This isn't a statute. It isn't a bylaw. It's not a regulation. It's a guide. And I just want to remind all of us of that.
Yes.
It's not binding. It's a.
Yeah. So to echo that, I think that if it's a guide, and as long as it's not handcuffing us from where we invest in our infrastructure, Travis, based on everything you heard, do you have any concerns? Are there any showstoppers that if we make? I think you can get a flavor for what we're thinking, and you could probably guess what some of the edits are going to look like. Is this going to go back to the select board, and now instead of being pencils down, they're going back to the beginning? Or do you see these as minor bumps that the select board would obviously need to deliberate, and then they'd align with us?
I don't know. Ben is the liaison. He's on if he wants to weigh in.
I don't think there's any
out. He's not on video.
I don't think there's any way of predicting that until he sees where our edits are, right?
Well, I mean, we're giving him a flavor. I'm not asking. I'm not going to hold anyone. I'm just trying to figure out this conversation. Is this like a nothing burger for the select board? And then the real issue is making sure that we're in agreement with the other folks on the OPEB side. Because at town meeting, I don't think any of the residents are looking for us to air dirty laundry. They voted for us to get on the same page and present to them a plan that they may have minor questions or concerns about, but we're all stepping into the boardroom, so to speak, all on the same page. So I'm asking, we're providing very candid feedback, and Ben, is this going to cause heartburn for the select board? Any of the feedback you heard?
May I speak, Chair, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
So we haven't had a big discussion in public about OPEB. So I frankly don't know a lot about how the other members of the select board feel on this topic. I've certainly had, my circles and things like that. I have a couple things just on some of the conversation. I don't want to get too deep in it. I don't want to debate or anything like that. I'm just going to give you my 2 cents. It's just my personal 2 cents here. First thing is that, the point of a policy, in my opinion, is to help guide policymakers, as Michelle pointed out. And I understand it's just a guide, but then what's the point? And I mean, if it can be discarded, then what are we doing? It should be something like when I'm making decisions, that we understand what we've all kind of figured out as the foundation and the structure that we want to abide by. And I think it's important for us to understand that, so it makes it easier for us to work within those guidelines that have been put before us, and how we vote and how we approve or look at certain topics. That being said, I think one of the things we have to be careful about is tying the hands of policymakers from being able to make reasonable choices and recommendations that are outside, that are contrary. I mean, you know, so it's sort of that, it is that fine line. We want to tell the OPEB trust to make an impartial recommendation, and the finance committee can make it clear, and the select board may as well. This is what we're hoping for, and the OPEB trust can either, you know, they could say, look, financially, this is the thing that makes the most sense. This is the route that should be taken. So I'm kind of getting around to the point of saying that, you know, I want to make sure that we have the ability to make good policy and understand what the expectations are for the policies we make, whatever, vis-a-vis our rates, free cash, whatever, but also being able to make those decisions. You know, so this is an important document in the sense that it gives us those guidelines, but it also needs to be something that we can, you know, look at and, you know, think about, you know, but also, you know, it's, sorry, it's late. I've been on Zooms with you guys for way too long today. Even though I didn't say anything, I was on them. So, you know, so long story short, you know, what I'm looking for from you, I'm not going to weigh in on most of these topics because you haven't given me anything to weigh in on. You've told me like what you guys want to change, but I haven't heard any votes from this committee on what you guys actually, what's actually from the finance committee. And until that takes place, I mean, we can have offhand discussions and stuff like that, but until that actually takes place, it's really not, I really don't want to weigh in on those. I want to hear what you think. I want to hear your opinions, and I want you guys to come to some sort of consensus internally, and then we can work together to come to a conclusion.
And in fairness, while the select board, the school committee, they are sort of operating policy makers, the finance committee is a financial policy making board as well. So we have a role in policy as it relates to the finances of the town. So, I mean, I'm not saying you were debating otherwise, but I just want to make it clear that the select board and the school committee and these other executive boards are not the only policymakers in town, because that has been argued by others. So, but as far, I mean, I understand we haven't taken any votes, but you could certainly state sort of your, you know, where you, I mean, you know, if we were to do a policy where for at least the next 2 years, and we'll look at it again, we continue with the current funding schedule, unless, you know, we can meet it by 2033 and then put less money aside. And then we also look to commit $250,000 into the pension plan, which is what it seems like Travis is trying to get at, getting into the pension plan, while still meeting, you know, the ability to spend money on new initiatives, to spend money on capital, to, you know, to do the things that, you know, I know your board, the school, other boards want to be able to do. Is that something in principle that you would be opposed to?
That I'd be opposed to an OPEB funding? I'm sorry, you said a lot there. What exactly?
The OPEB funding of $1.5 million a year using a 2033 funding schedule. And then we can look at it if the 2033 funding schedule comes in at less than 1.5.
Well, I guess then that, you know, then the question becomes, you know, you said your red line is your red line the 2033 or the 1.5?
I said the red line is the 2033 is changing our mortgage maturity date.
I understand. And that because it's important, because the two could be different based on, and I'm not saying they are.
I'm not saying I'm committing to reducing the 1.5 even at if 2033 showed less than that, but I'm saying I'm certainly open to that conversation. What I'm not really open to is pushing out pushing
out 2033. But I haven't heard, like, I mean, you and I can talk about this offline, Dan, but, you know, the finance committee, until there's a vote, I'm not really comfortable.
Well, but
like,
I mean,
saying like that, you know, how we're going to feel about it in total. I mean, I haven't heard a vote. That's what I want personally. And you guys can vote whenever you want, but
we're not going to obviously vote.
I don't want to be debating Dan. I want a policy that I can.
Right, and that's why I'm saying we should make the changes we want to make and vote them.
Well, Jay was asking kind of our select board opinion on sort of what we've been talking about.
I was troubling it. Let's just kill it, because I'm not going to get an answer. So let's just kill it.
Well,
we're wasting time.
Right? I don't blame Ben. Ben's correct, right? He's got to see what we want to change before he can make a comment on it. So that's why I said, let's focus on making the changes we want to make, and then we'll get them something. So the plan is, Dan, you're going to take charge of editing.
And if anyone has any, real opposition to sort of wants to just send me an email with what your edits, your changes would be separate to sort of what you think I might be doing, and I can try to at least incorporate that or put a side note in it saying others have sort of said this, and we can also talk about it.
Well, the question is, when are we becoming too prescriptive? Like,
I'm not going to be very prescriptive. It's not going to look any more prescriptive than what's in here now. It's just going to be a little different. I'm not looking to tie anyone's hands, and frankly, this document doesn't actually tie anyone's hands. It sets guiding principles, and we'd obviously like to follow them, but it doesn't actually. Again, as Michelle says, this is not a bylaw or any kind of regulation that actually.
I just want to make one point on that too, because I agree with the statement that Michelle is making, which is right. Like, for example, last year we went above the 1% for the reserve fund. It was a decision that was made. It's not a problem. We explain why we did it. If S&P asks the question, I have the answer to, it was a specific response to COVID, not a problem outside of it. But I am, on an annual basis, this committee is going to want, select board is going to want, S&P is going to want, where are your policy guidelines? Where do you actually fall? Benchmark it, show us where you are. So yes, it's a guideline, but it is very much tracked.
We don't want to set ourselves up for failure because that will look poorly upon us. I get that.
And we don't want to just say, oh, they're just, it's advice and we can do what we want. I mean, I understand Travis's point entirely. And that's why I said we've been talking a long time. Let's get the feedback incorporated by Dan, and let's go from there and have that discussion and take a vote next week on a document and go from there.
But Ken, our goal is that we know we are successful with this exercise when we've reached alignment between the Finance Committee and the Select Board, or is success alignment between the Finance Committee, Select Board, and the OPEB Committee?
So OPEB Trust has nothing to do with it. They're custodians of the funds. So it's us and the Select Board.
Okay.
Yes.
And keep in mind, Travis and a member of the Select Board are on the OPEB Trust Committee.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of overlap.
Okay, so it's us in the Select Board.
Us and the Select Board. Absolutely.
Got it. Thank you.
I mean, that's one thing I was going to point out is the OPEB, we're acting as though the OPEB Trust Board has some statutory authority. They are custodians in the same way that, Fidelity can be the custodian for your IRA, right? Fidelity doesn't demand what you fund to your IRA. They just manage and maintain the funds and make sure it's all being done according to the law. The OPEB Trust Board can certainly make recommendations, right? And just like we make recommendations to the town, and that's good. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they're custodians of the funds. That's the way the special act is set up.
They're fiduciaries, yeah.
Yes. So they don't have this prescribed power to dictate what the town does. The town has the power to dictate what the town does.
They're a financial advisor more than
yes, exactly.
As a custodian.
That's why I said Fidelity can tell you should put this into your fund or what they think you need for retirement, but ultimately they have no power to make you do anything.
So our goal is to align with the Select Board on this.
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
You come to a mutual alignment. Yeah.
Yes.
So that then we present that to, it's like town, here's the artifact that we then use.
When the policy is completed and approved by both boards, it gets posted to the town website for anybody who wants to see it. And S&P gets a copy of it when they do our ratings reviews and things like that.
Right.
We do not go to town meeting because aside from the fact that we'd have 400 people in mass sweeping if we went through this policy at town meeting, but we do make it available to the public. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not prescribing that. I'm saying that we have that document out there when anyone says like, why did you make this decision? We say,
oh, absolutely.
We either complied with it or we deviated, and here's the reason why we deviated. And I think then at town meeting, everyone's like, okay, I'm confident.
Yeah, that's exactly why we created it in the first place, right?
I'm just going to pull up for the vast audience here to show where this is on our website. And one of the goals, no matter what comes out of the final version here, is that it's going to look much cleaner than the scanned copy that is currently on our website. So if you go to town links, financial policies and information, one is the most recent Standard & Poor's rating review. This is the most up-to-date 2020 approved financial policy. It says every 2 years we're going to look at it again. So if you scroll down, you'll see it under 22, you'll see it under 18, you'll see it under 16. Every 2 years we update it. The capital plan is on here for the first time. The OPEB actuarial report, which is generated every 2 years by GASB. We have to do that, is on here. The ones for the pension fund, which is the Middlesex County retirement system on the town side and the Mass Teachers retirement system on the teacher side, are kept on their websites, but we obviously have access to as well. And so these policies, again, the scanned version, I apologize for, and we will make sure it's a clean copy this time. This is what every 2 years we're going to update, and I will reference, the vote taken by the Finance Committee to approve it, the vote taken by the Select Board to approve it, gets posted online, and then again, as the chair mentioned, we would let S&P know. They did reference in their rating review of us this time that they anticipated that we would be updating our finance policies by the time that we go back to market on the bond on well number 5, and that will be in the spring of next year. So if we stick to the timeline and we're done by February is the latest time that's ever been done, we're in good shape.
Yeah, we'll get it done by February. I'm not worried about that. Yeah. So, okay. So
I'm a little worried.
we have horse meat. So are we good on the policy? We have a plan. Dan's going to coordinate the edits. Send Dan anything you want to include in the edits, and then we'll have the discussion and vote next week. Sound like a plan? Everybody good? Okay. Now that is the last thing, kind of going back. We were looping back to that at the end for just this reason, but that's the last thing we had on our agenda. So if I'll give everybody one last chance to speak up. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, just question on the liaisons. I dropped you an email about the one of the committees that I was asking about.
At this, I'll look into it, but at this time, I don't see changes coming.
Okay.
There are a couple of minor adjustments that have to be made.
Okay, I haven't reached out to any of my committees. I'll start doing that. So
Yeah.
we're pencils down on the assignments.
Yes, I can
All right.
see that's your phrase of the day, right? So
I've been working with a lot of lawyers on actually one of the things is implementing a contract management system. So everything that you guys were just talking about, I'm laughing because I'm building a tool that orchestrates all that. So
there you go.
town couldn't afford that. We'd be talking about a lot more than
Right.
free cash funds.
Okay, so okay, anybody have anything else before we close? Okay, then I will entertain the motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, that is not subject to debate, so we'll proceed to an immediate vote. Ms. Ziemer,
Aye.
Mr. Alfred,
Yes.
Mr. Whitaker,
Yes.
Mr. Murphy,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
and I vote yes. That concludes the Tuesday, August 24th meeting of the Finance Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight. And obviously, if you have any questions about what you heard tonight, don't call us. No, just kidding. Just feel free to reach out to any member of the Finance Committee, and we'll be happy to talk to you. But for tonight, we're done. So thank you and good night.
Recording.